Right, this is just a little bit of background picture. I'm not sure if any of you have been to the wonderful Isle of Man or not. The office out in the countryside is our new office because we've relocated out to countryside, and very nice it is too. And I hope Northern Ireland enjoy their new location by the seaside. A bit of background for you about the Isle of Man, and please excuse me if you know some of this stuff already. We are in the middle of the Irish Sea, in the red part. We are bounded obviously by Ireland and Scotland and England and Wales, and we're not to be confused with any other little islands around the British Isles, which sometimes people do. We pride ourselves on our high health status over a number of species for varying diseases. In relation to cattle, we have EU recognised freedoms for brucellosis, enzootic bovine leukosis, and recently bovine TB. And we're always looking for new diseases to cover. But obviously, as we're all aware, BVD is a little bit different from other things, so we need a bit of a different approach. An idea of scale of our cattle farming, we've got about 30,000 live cattle at any one time, and of these, about 12,000 are breeding animals. Annual births, about 10,500. A lot of our dairy farmers now, despite all my hard work in my younger days, are now very keen on going over 12 months for calving intervals. Times change, BVD ideas change, and so do other ideas, apparently. In terms of active holdings, we have about 230 holdings, and we have about 200 of these are breeding holdings. We take a very rigid line that a holding is a single epidemiological unit. We do not subdivide into herds. It makes a lot of things a lot easier. We have a single meat plant, a single abattoir. We have a single livestock market, so it's quite easy to keep tabs on these things compared to a lot of your jurisdictions. We have cattle coming in. It varies a lot, averaging perhaps about 400 a year, roughly half and half beef and dairy, and these are breeding animals, some bulls and a lot of breeding females. And obviously in relation to BVD, this is a challenge because a lot of these animals are pregnant because it effectively halves the transport costs. Transport to the island is easily available, but it is expensive. In terms of cattle exports, this is possibly where you're more interested. We send, it varies a lot, it's been going up in recent years, probably about 4,500 cattle. The majority of these will be going either for fairly immediate slaughter or stores, but possibly in the region of about a third of them are dairy animals, which are presumably going to be grown on and kept for quite a while. History of BVD on the Isle of Man. Well, I certainly used to see it out and about in my private veterinary days back in the 1980s. And it was just ticking away then, people becoming more aware of the problems. Really, about 2009, we started seriously talking about the possibility of controlling and eradicating it. And we were talking with our farmers and our farmers' union and our veterinary surgeons. And moving further forward, it's really January 2013, we actually launched some veterinary workshops and farmer workshops and showed them how the new scheme was going to work. And in February 2013, we launched a voluntary scheme. Now, I'll probably skate over some of the details because we've heard it from previous presenters. Basically, what the voluntary scheme consisted of was tag testing for the virus. And in exchange for this, the farmers agreed to supply us with the results. And we basically subsidised the laboratory fees and we provided the tissue sampling tags. This was very well received. About 2/3 of holdings signed up to it, and this covered about 3/4 of the projected births. Basically, the bigger farmers seem to be more engaged in the process. Building on this, and again with lots of consultation with our farmers and our farmers' union, in 2014 we progressed to a compulsory scheme. So this means we have legislation. This carried on the tissue testing of calves, and it basically applied to all the calves were born. They had to be done by 20 days of age, which obviously coincides with birth registrations. And we were testing them for the virus, the antigen. We had restrictions. Positive animals cannot be moved except for slaughter or culling, and you'll be delighted to know we don't export them. We also have testing of dams of positive calves, and we infer results from negative calves. Breeding bulls have to be tested negative before they can be moved, and I have almost run out of drums to bang on to tell people that really moving bulls around is not a good idea, but it's what the industry wants to do and it's what they need to do, so we really try and reduce the risks there if we can. And although we insist upon this, it's actually separate legislation. We insist on the testing of imported animals to make sure we don't get any in through the back door. Here we've got some results of our progress. I should emphasise this is live animals only. These are the ones we've got left at the moment. So 2013, that was a voluntary scheme, and it's interesting, we had a slightly higher level of positives when people were doing it voluntarily, which suggests that people who were aware they got problems wanted to do something about it. 2014 was our first year of the compulsory scheme. We turned up at 61 then. 2015, the following year, we actually turned up more then, and actually our cattle birth numbers had gone up quite markedly that year as well. That's another story. So really 2015 hopefully was the peak. We had about 0.73% of samples were positive, and it's come down quite considerably last year, down to about 0.4%. And obviously this year is only a partial year, but at the moment it's looking as though we're around the same spot. So there's lots of good news there. We're obviously detecting it and we are getting rid of it, and I'll tell you more about getting rid of these ones later. But we seem to be hitting a bit of a plateau, and we'll be discussing this in the workshops this afternoon, I think. What's gone well? Well, it's a very new way of working together because we need an awful lot of biosecurity to actually control BVD, and with my legislative hat on, you can legislate all you want, but getting to people to comply with it is something very different, and it is really about winning hearts and minds. We subsidised the laboratory fees, and this certainly helped gain interest and compliance. That was on a sliding scale, and that has stopped. We went straight in and tested for the virus, for the antigen, so we identified infected animals. We didn't do any antibody testing, so this streamlined the process and kept costs down. We've controlled BVD, and we have evidence of reduction in the incidence, so that's great. We engaged most of our cattle farmers. Real life, nothing ever goes quite as well as you'd hoped, and stuff happens. We require people to use an approved laboratory, like other people do. We had a change in laboratories in 2014, and this resulted in delays in processing times, which means, unfortunately, infected animals were kicking around longer. We have a fairly sophisticated IT system, and we have our own cattle passport system, and we've actually grafted our BVD database onto our cattle passport system, so our online users can go in and look up their holding records, and they can also see their BVD results. But we had an ongoing IT issue with updating the database, really dragging on from 2014 to mid-2016, which interfered with processing the results and getting the updates back to the farming community. So it was hard to keep momentum going in the absence of a sort of constant flow of information. Winning hearts and minds. Yes, it's delightful to see you all here today, but possibly some of the most important people to see are the ones who aren't here. And it's exactly the same with our farmers. I see the same friendly faces, and I know most of our farmers because we're a small place, but it's the people that don't come that really are where an awful lot of the problem lies. And I'm really intrigued how we engage those people, whether it's social media or what we do. Biosecurity and compliance. We have some compliance issues. I say just because it's a law doesn't actually mean everyone follows it to the letter, and I'll come on to that again later. Retention of PIs. Just because you've tested something and you've shown it is persistently infected, a lot of people, the majority, will get rid of them. Sadly, not all of them, especially the beef farmers when the thing apparently looks okay on the outside. And some of them will hang on to them literally for years. what we did was we said, OK, we want to push this forward. We are proposing that we're going to disclose the location to allow better informed decision making. We've heard earlier today that obviously having a neighbour with this is a risk factor. We publish outline information at the moment about which areas of the island have positives, but not down to a farm level. So there's an awful lot of whispering going on, not all very accurate. So we had a spectacular reaction to this idea that we're going to publicise this, and we had 35 live PIs on farm, and within a couple of weeks that had gone down below 10. So I think that illustrates the point. You can legislate all you want, but there's nothing like peer pressure. That's very, very positive. The numbers who vaccinate, we probably have about a third of the breeding holdings, both dairy and beef, and I think there are arguments for and against vaccination. One of the potential pluses is obviously you reduce the spread of disease, great. Potential drawback is that some people do tend to see this as an alternative to biosecurity. This is really where the role of a vet comes in very much to reinforce that side of things. How are we going to take this forward? People don't always comply with rules just because they're there, and I should perhaps explain, on the Isle of Man we have our own separate government, and we have a different relationship to the European Union than the rest of you. At least most of you have at the moment, and that will be changing with Brexit. So we're not quite as constrained by all the rules you are. So you might be surprised that actually our Farmers Union were very, very keen that we put penalties in our farm support system for people who didn't comply with the rules relating to BVD. So they have gone in this year. So if people don't test in time and other things, they will get financial penalties there. So it's great that it actually came from them. The industry is really pushing for it. We are proposing to put legislation through to allow us to disclose the location of positive animals, and this will say basically the holding number, and it will give the fact there's a positive animal there, and it will give the date of the test. And we're also proposing to say where an animal has been an infected animal has been present in the last 6 weeks. Really progressing towards eradication, and I don't want to steal the thunder of this afternoon's workshop about what eradication means. We really need to work, I think, harder to form a common view with both the farming community and with private veterinarians about what eradication actually looks like. We need to understand better the paradoxes of vaccination and culling. I say we have an issue with vaccination over people seeing it as a I'll do the vaccination, don't need to worry about biosecurity. And culling, most of our farmers have gone out and they've culled the positive animals, absolutely tremendous. We have some people who don't. The view of our farmers very strongly is they do not want to see compensation for persistently infected animals because they think it will reward bad behaviour. And this isn't straightforward because obviously we've heard other people, if you actually pay people to remove these things, it does work. But we have to deal with them. They think, I did it for nothing, I don't see why so-and-so should actually get rewarded for this. So we need to talk about that. We need to import cattle, and we need to think about practical ways we can actually manage the risks on that. And really, in line with a previous speaker, I think the big take-home message is we need to really, really push communication and clear ideas. One of the things we did was we made testing very easy because we did it with tissue tags so the farmers could do it themselves when it fitted in with other processes. But by doing this, not only do we save money, but we also reduced veterinary input on farm. And we're very much looking for the vets in practice to actually be the liaison for people, because however nice and approachable we like to think we are, we're always seen as part of an institution, and people tend to take things much better from their private vets. So we're really trying to work with them to persuade people to get the biosecurity up.
Thanks very much, Alistair, for sharing your whispers with us. Any questions for Alistair?
Hi. I just want to ask if you could elaborate slightly on the biosecurity that you're encouraging the farmers to to go down the line. Lots of people keep touching on the biosecurity words and question and view, but could you just elaborate a little how far you're trying to move the farmers down on a biosecurity, biocontainment kind of area, please?
We provide general advice on biosecurity, and we urge people to isolate persistently infected animals and keep them separate. We urge people to ask who they're thinking of buying cattle off, what their history is. And, you know, we don't have any legislation for this, but it is actually difficult. And one of the snags is by the time you get the results back for these animals, they have been positive for quite a while already. So you're always catching up from behind. So I don't know if that answers your question in details enough. It's really sort of blanket biosecurity we're suggesting, both sort of within the farm containing your PIs and also without the farm, talking to people where you get animals from and making sure you get them to the right place. One of the things I didn't mention is we do actually have the ability to issue licences for animals which have not got a test result. And these are sort of foster calves going to beef holdings. But we encourage people to find out the status of the holding they're actually coming from. But a lot of it is done in conjunction with their private vets because obviously they know the holding history and also whether they're using vaccination or not, which can make a significant impact on how they behave.